Hello everyone, thanks again for joining me. I am doing this video to give you some of the symptoms. Now this is the important part, I feel, that people overlook very quickly, and I don't think it should be overlooked. I will always say, as a parent, you should follow your gut. I know fact that as a parent I have very strong feelings about things, and you need to follow your gut instinct. So as far as the symptoms go, I'm going to do Lewis first, because Lewis has a diagnosis of autism, low ability. The low ability comes from the fact that he isn't academically where he should be. So we'll start at the beginning. It has been hard to try and sift through the information. I didn't want to overload you. Now, with Lewis, he was my first. When he was born, it was very quick delivery, and he refused to feed. That took a day for him to start feeding. After that, I assumed, and everyone else did, that it was just the fact that it was a quick delivery. He would cry for hours and hours on end. It was so bad that my husband and I would have to do it in shifts, because it's very difficult when you have a persistently crying baby. We're not talking cry, stop, we're talking constant crying. At the time, this was put down to colic, and then it was blamed on teeth. Now, they should have been a little bit of an alarm bell at the time. But again, being my first child, I had a lot of trust in the health professionals. The health visitors were giving me this information, and that's, I had no reason to question them. It then went on to the fact that he would not play with toys, wouldn't play with them. He would flick them around at best. That was it really, as far as symptoms as a baby. He was quite late in talking, but other than that, there was nothing, no indication at all. As he started getting older, with sort of toddler years, we noticed that his sleep was horrendous. He wouldn't sleep. He would be up in the night, 2:00 in the morning. He thinks it's time to get up and play. Again, we sought advice, and we were told that it's very common in boys not to want to sleep. So again, we took that and thought, okay, I was absolutely exhausted. Lewis would also have to have a DVD player. We introduced it in a car journey one day, and that was it. It was like it was joined to him at the hip. He had to carry this DVD player around everywhere. It was like an escape for him. We then got him a MP3 player, just because we thought, it's nice for him to have a bit of music, because he loves music. So at the time, it was very relaxing to have something that he had that would take away this heightened anxiety that he would have every time we went out, every time we went somewhere. So that was very nice at the time, but again, we didn't think anything different of it. When it came to his peers, he would be alongside them. He wouldn't play with them. He wouldn't interact with them. And then we went on to the temper tantrums. Now, being the twos, there's this whole terrible twos scenario that goes on, but this was to the extreme. And I didn't actually realise how much of an extreme it was until we had a friend come and stay with us. And he went for a walk with Lewis and my husband, and they went a different way. Just because my husband wanted to swing by the parents' house, the grandparents' house, to introduce and sort of say that our friend had come to stay. And the meltdown that followed, it was a good mile away from the house, and I could hear Lewis screaming from the house. Now, this scream was horrendous. It was just I had visions of him being knocked by a car, falling off the bike, as I say, it was just horrendous and it just didn't stop. And so I asked Kieran what happened, and he said it was literally the fact that they'd gone a different way to the usual way. Now, at that point, the alarm bells started to ring a little bit, and I thought, right, we need to get this sorted. We do need to seek advice, because the temper tantrums were so violent, and he would headbang a lot. So we had a behavioural health visitor come out, and of course we're at home, part of a routine. Adults never bothered Lewis. So she came in, she saw him at his calmest, and she said, "You're doing a fantastic job, Mrs. Joy. Your child is blooming wonderfully." So again, it was made out like it's just a normal thing in a normal child. Now, we know there's no such thing as normal with any child. So it's very difficult then to say, well, actually, I'd had my daughter by this point, and her being a baby was just a walk in the park. But being a girl, we put it down to the fact that it was a girl, and the girls apparently are more laid back than boys. So that, again, we thought it was just that. Now, we always had issues with other children. Preschool, we had problems with other children. It was like almost like an excuse for Lewis. He had to have a problem as to why he hadn't played with somebody. He lacks empathy for his peers completely. Now, something that did come up, I've been searching what symptoms are to compare them to Lewis, really. And social etiquette comes up, and lack of social etiquette. Now, Lewis is the complete opposite. Now, he has to have the etiquette. He has to follow the rules. He finds it very rude if someone doesn't thank him when he opens a door. And that's the kind of thing that Lewis gets hung up on. If he says hello to somebody, he expects a hello back. And they're the kind of unwritten rules that Lewis follows. He doesn't speak out of turn. He says things that are very relevant, and he appears to make eye contact, and I think this is quite important. Now, Lewis, I think, was fantastic at masking. Now, I know girls are absolutely known for masking, but boys not so much. But Lewis definitely had it down to a T. When you look at him, he appears to make eye contact. But when you actually look where he's actually looking, he's focusing on a point behind your head. And I think that's so clever that he came up with that at a very young age, knowing that eye contact was almost expected. That's what he does. And he still does it now. At 12 years old, he focuses on a point behind the head. Because the only reason I've noticed that is when you move, Lewis's eye contact doesn't move. So it's very clever. But again, masking is very common. And I think that really makes it difficult for us parents, because we get a lot of the disruption and the true feelings at home. So next really was the fact that he has no regulation of his emotions, none whatsoever. So an example, we were out, I was feeding my daughter, and we heard an absolutely high-pitched scream. So much so that I thought he'd really hurt himself, or it was going to be one of his meltdowns. As we ran out to see what on earth was going on, a bug had touched his finger. Now, it was like, and you could not console him. Could not console him over a bug touching his finger. At first I thought maybe he'd been stung or bitten, but no, it was literally the fact that this bug had touched his finger. So again, these little things were starting to creep in, and I was starting to have my concerns. At this point, we'd moved house. So again, it was put down to the fact that we'd moved house. We had a very difficult transition into the school. Again, at the time, had we known, we would have done a lot more preparation. But because it's, we didn't know, we didn't think of anything being untoward, he really struggled with the transition into school. And this was when he was in year 2, and he was 6 years old, and he started to self-harm. He would dig his nails into his skin so much that it drew blood. He would do it on his forehead here, and he would do it on his arms. At that point, alarm bells were really ringing for me, because self-harming in a child means something's not right. So this is where the ball started rolling, so to speak. The new school found out that he was very behind academically. So they were putting in more tools to help support him, and this is where an IEP came in for Lewis. So still at this time, we assumed that maybe an anxiety issue, because again, he had extreme levels of anxiety over everything, such as my husband going to work, when he would be home, what time, what we're having for dinner, anything. The slightest little thing would cause anxiety. He needed the routine, he needed the structure, and he needed to know what was going on, where, when, and why. So again, we put this down to like an anxiety thing, because they are the symptoms that you have when you suffer with anxiety. So that is what I assumed it was. So after that, it then started to get more and more apparent. So we enrolled him into rugby. And obviously at 6 years old, they play tag rugby. So for those that don't know, they wear a Velcro belt, and they have a Velcro tag. And the aim of the game is to tag the ball with your tag. Lewis got very cross because he could not understand the game, he could not understand the concept, and he couldn't understand why someone was taking his tag. I explained it to him, the coach explained it to him, another parent explained it to him, and he still just couldn't understand. There was just it was ending up that we just left in the end, because there was just little understanding there, and he was getting himself so worked up over something that should be enjoyable. So we stopped playing rugby, and we then thought, let's try something non-contact. But at this point, we've sort of realised that actually he would always focus on one child being his friend. It couldn't be anyone else, and he would get incredibly upset if someone else played with that child. It also came apparent that rules in school, if they were not followed, Lewis would take it upon himself to ensure those rules were followed, and would try and implement the discipline methods for the child had they broken the rules. So again, you think that this is something that he's obsessing over, and again, being quite naive at the time, still no hint that it could be autism. Being behind in school, we thought maybe it's something like dyslexia, which causes the anxiety because he doesn't feel like he's where he should be. We all know anxiety can cause so many symptoms, and this is where I was leaning towards. I then decided to invite in an educational psychologist. I really value educational psychologist's opinion. I wanted to know why and what, and is there something more to it? And if I'm honest, again, like I say, it was dyslexia that was sort of poking out in my brain to what it could be. We would get violent meltdowns at home. At 6, the terrible 2s have well and truly gone, and the troublesome threesomes are long gone too. But these meltdowns, and he would become incredibly violent incredibly quickly. He would also often not calm down until he was in a dark room with no stimulation, no lights, no sound. He would have to go under a duvet. We got him a dark den, that helped. So with that being said, again, as I've said yesterday, had I known then what I know now, the signs were there. The signs were there. So going on towards the technology side of things, obviously I touched on the fact that he had the DVD player and the music player, and that's obviously as time has gone on, technology's gotten better, and he's ended up with a tablet and the Xbox, and they still are his outlet, his his calm down, his relaxation. It's almost like it's a way of dealing with the situation, a way of shutting down without actually appearing to shut down. Because again, Lewis still masks very well, and he doesn't want to be different. He doesn't want to appear to be different. He doesn't want to stand out in the crowd. He just wants to blend into the background. And obviously certain things make you stand out a little bit. Lewis also suffers with Tourette's vocal tics. These are involuntary sounds. And what I didn't realise was they mutate. I say mutate, but they change. I assumed, again, me being naive, I assumed that if it was a vocal tic, it would be the same noise constantly. But it would almost go in patterns of sort of 6 weekly to 3 monthly change. So it would be one noise, and then sort of 6 weeks later it would change into something else. Lewis claps a lot, and he flaps like a bird, and jumps up and down on the spot. Again, at the time, you think it's an excited child. And I think if you were to put all this together, it would have been staring at me right in the face. But it wasn't, and it didn't stare at me in the face. And I think it's important to say here that you question yourself as a parent. Is it something that I've done? You don't assume, you assume that it's your first child, you're bringing them up the best you can. I must have done something to cause all of this. And it wasn't until a family support practitioner pointed out that if it was something to do with my parenting, my daughter would behave in the same way. So that was all I kind of needed for that. Lewis is a very literal thinker. Raining cats and dogs, that's a good one. He's looking up in the air. Not so bad now he knows that it's not going to literally rain cats and dogs. The first time he's looking up in the air, where are they? So literal thinking for Lewis. He self-harms quite a lot when he's highly anxious. We do what we can to eliminate his anxiety. So self-harm is always a symptom in my mind, I think, of something not quite right, be it autism, anxiety, depression. If your child is self-harming, there is definitely something not quite right. I think that's probably about it really for Lewis. He struggles retaining information. He has to have visual information. I know when the educational psychologist came in, she said that they do everything on these percentile charts. And for auditory processing, Lewis was on the 2nd percentile. So to give him information verbally, he does not retain it whatsoever. Yet, if you give it to him visually, he's on the 96th percentile. So again, that's definitely something that if your child's not retaining information, and the fact that I think it's difficult because children are brilliant at selective hearing, especially when you want them to do something. But I think it's more than that. I think if you're giving them an instruction of something that they're enjoying or something that they're wanting to do and they're not retaining it, I think that should send out alarm bells as well. Now, I think I've rabbited on about symptoms enough. I think at the end of the day, your child. If you feel that something's not quite right, then do something about it. Looking at the symptoms that Lewis had, he did not follow all the categories of an autism symptom. So again, like I've said many times in this video, it wasn't apparent, it wasn't obvious. So it wasn't something that I had even come across. Now I know he's got autism. Yes, the symptoms were there. There was so many red flags that should have flagged up. And I think the worst thing is when you go to their health professionals for help, and because you're only going for the one thing, their flags don't go up either. For example, sleep. Lewis and his sleep, until now, he's now on melatonin. But before that, he would not sleep, and it was always put down to the fact that he was a boy, or it would get better when he would start school. It was the fact that he was bored. There was always an issue, there was always a reason for it as far as the health visitors and the doctors were concerned. The school nurse gave me massage routines, which we would do. We would do lavender. It didn't matter how calming and how many routines we followed. Lewis would not fall asleep until about midnight, and then he would get up at about 3-4 o'clock, expecting to start the day. And of course, as we know, as adults, the minute you're tired, everything else just gets more difficult, so the anxiety heightens. So my advice here would be, I think if you have an inclination that there's something not quite right with your child, go and do something. There really isn't a right and wrong. I don't think there is a set pattern that your child will follow. I was going to try and do Orin at the same video, but I've realised that I'm now quite far in, and I wanted to do short videos because I know us special needs parents, we don't have a great deal of time to sit down and watch videos. So I'm going to do Orin in another video, just so you've got the comparison there as well, because they were very different, and and I think that's important to note, because when you are Googling your symptoms and Googling what it could be, you're not going to follow every single one. You're not going to think, oh yes, that's it. And I think that's where it's important with autism, that there are many ways of people and children displaying it. So I'll do that in another video, but thank you for watching this. If you've managed to watch it all the way to the end, thank you, and I'm sorry if I've rambled on a bit too much. I hope you found it helpful. Thanks. Bye.